Michael's going to be sharing with us today his experiences and insights from at least 10 years of shamanic work, which is, in his words, is for the expansion of awareness. Michael started out at the age of 19 while attending University for Engineering. He earned a MS in Optical Engineering, but he felt like he was living two lives, one being the recommended track that society thinks you should be doing, and the other was the calling of his spirit. Then after 10 years of that, he fully committed to the spiritual side, the calling, focusing on healing himself and influencing others to heal. And this is taking many forms in his kuleana, such as hospice volunteering, mentorship of teenage boys or men, and breathwork facilitation. Now please welcome Michael.
So thank you for having me. It's good to be back at New Thought. Some of you that have been here for a while know that prior to COVID, I was doing breathwork facilitation here, and that was a really profound experience for me in my process of being a facilitator in the larger community. Prior to that, I'd been doing a lot more individual work, and so coming here and having this opportunity to be a part of this community was instrumental in getting me into the broader community. And as a very, very important side note, it was shortly after Sean and I started dating was when I started doing the group sessions here. And for all of Shauna's good qualities, I saw a completely different side of her when we were doing this breath work, because without any provocation on my part, I could see the natural healer in her emerge. And it opened up my perception of her and our relationship in a completely different way, and seeing how that potential and all that meaning was going to evolve. And I do talk a bit about that in the book. Now, Shauna is kind of shy, so can we all just look at her for a moment and send her some love? Thank you, Shauna.
You're welcome.
So I wrote a book, and the initial purpose of all the writing was not to put my story out in a certain sense of diminishing the ego and becoming integrated with all of reality. To write a book about myself is kind of ironic, right? It's like, look how special I am, it's something silly like that. And so that was never the purpose. The purpose was originally through the process of recapitulation, such that I would go with a very fine-tooth comb through all the experiences of my life and look at everything and say, am I actually complete with this event? This fight that I had, that was so long ago, I don't care anymore. But really looking at each individual event, going all the way back into my infancy, and saying, is this actually complete? Am I done with this? Is there any emotional charge left here? And a few things, it turned out that there were interesting stories, events that were meaningful, but I didn't realize that the charge had been dissipated until I was even maybe most of the way through editing. And I'm like trying to put this story together in a way, and and just as it's like, oh, it's not coming together, it's like that's always the indication that there's still a blockage. If the story's not quite coming together, it's because there's a blind spot. And so even doing the editing later on, way later on, it still helped me to see these little parts that of me that were stuck. And so that was the original motivation to get all this stuff in writing. And I figured, the misunderstandings of a child are not particularly important to other people. So I condensed the material of the book to the last roughly 10 years, just to make it more relatable and interesting, I think. And so that was the real motivation for writing the book, is not to aggrandize myself, but to kind of just put this material out there for other people to experience it. And the other big thing I think is when the mind opens, a lot of unusual things happen. And if you don't have proper support, you can feel like you're going nuts. And I went through a lot of that, feeling like reality was shredding, not dissolving as if it's going away, but warping around me. And it was really hard to feel like I'm not just becoming a cliche that someone just lost their mind and then becomes an unproductive member of society and so forth. So I felt like it was really important to share my story and the breadth of all of my experiences, so that someone else who's going through the same thing can read this and say, oh, this may not be exactly what I experienced, but I get that, and I understand that, and it makes me feel more confident and trusting with these experiences that I've had personally. On that note, I think that I try to be very, very careful with all the material that's in there, that there is no embellishment, because you can read through something and say, oh, he's just telling a story, or he's exaggerating, or anything like that can diminish the power of these particular visions and experiences. And it's important to emphasize that there's no embellishment or hyperbole at all, because it doesn't need it. It doesn't need to be embellished. And even with things that I'm, having been part of the spiritual community for a long time, there's a lot of things that I'm very aware of, but I would never write about it, only because I don't feel like I have enough personal, direct knowledge of that thing. So a good example is auras. Like, everyone here has probably heard of auras. I've heard about it for decades. I could probably talk for hours on theory, but I don't, for whatever reason, particularly experience auras with myself or other people. I do, however, experience the chakras. The energy centers that I have directly seen and worked with, I own that knowledge, so I feel comfortable talking about that, but not auras. And I'm try to be very careful about only discussing things that I am confident that I own that. One last thing about just the way the book is written is there's a lot of ways that we try to crack the shell of the mind in order to open it up to greater awareness. And certain practices are very intense, to say the least. If it's plant medicine or physical danger, shocking the system with heat, cold, salt, isolation. There's certain things that I feel like they were important for me to do at the time, but I might not have done them again that same way. If someone else were to do them, I'd say less of this, more of that, take these precautions. And certain things I'd say, you know what, I did it. It was kind of cool, but I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It's too much, because sometimes these practices can be so intense that the one is that if it's too intense, it can just frighten someone to such a degree that they walk away from the whole process altogether, and that's a tragedy to be discouraged at that level. The other much more important problem is that if you open the mind too fast and it loses its connection to the consensual reality too quickly, you can just lose your mind in a medical sense, in a dangerous way. And I've seen that happen. It's very unpleasant to witness, and I'm sure it's extremely unpleasant to experience. I've been very fortunate not to have any extended experiences of that nature, but I've seen it, and it's just something that I'm very critical of the certain medicine communities that don't acknowledge the importance and the value of easing the mind open. And in the bigger picture of that theme, having impatience with the way that you're growing, it's not loving. And that was a huge part of my personal process, was to see that rushing myself to become more aware, more spiritual, more anything, not accepting myself for where I am right here in this moment, is actually an unkindness that I was delivering to myself over and over and over again, saying, you are not good enough yet. And so that's not to say that we don't all have work to do, because we do, but to do it in a gentle and loving way with the intention of becoming happier and more authentic, as opposed to you're not good enough now. And that change in perspective is very important. It's very important for me. So I'd like to talk about what shamanism is really about for me. So in culture at large, we have an idea of what a shaman is. A lot of times if you say the word, people will think of somebody who wears feathers, and they have maybe like some paint on their face, and they are shrouded in mystery and all these things. That it's very, attractive in a certain sense, but I know shaman that wear suits, and it's the outward presentation of someone has actually very little to do with their connection to spirit. And that's what I would say being a shaman actually is the focus on connecting with the inner being. And I'll use that term. I could also say God or soul or ancestors or life. All these ways that we choose to turn inward and connect with that higher power in ourselves. It's that motivation that then I would say determines someone acting as a shaman. That it's a way of describing someone's behavior. It's not a title. You're not a shaman as if someone's like a policeman or a president. You're a shaman as in someone's like actively and consciously connecting with their inner knowledge. And so there are no restrictions or requirements for how you present yourself to the world, because your relationship with the world is secondary to your relationship with yourself. So the practice of shamanism in connecting with yourself it's something that I think a lot of people they don't realize how much work it is, because you're always on call, you're always on the clock, and that's that's this the idea that you can kind of relax and take indulgences. You know, all the various ways that people escape, if it's sex, drugs, alcohol, television, gambling, all these things. Ways that you would, in a previous part of your life, feel, well, I'm just relaxing. It doesn't cut it anymore, and the reason why is because as you more finely tune your awareness, all these little things that you do to distract yourself become very noticeable in how much they dull the blade. And so it's kind of like if you're, you know, as an example, if you eat poorly your whole life, then on one day you just eat an entire bag of potato chips, you might not notice. But if you're eating clean, healthy food your entire life, and then you eat a whole bag of potato chips, it's going to make you sick. It's like, well, there's nothing inherently evil about these potato chips. That doesn't make sense. But the departure from your baseline level of health makes that difference very uncomfortable. And so this is how I see it, in that the more finely tuned and focused you are, it's not that you can't have these indulgences, it's just that the cost of each one is so obvious and immediate that you start to lose interest. And it's something that I think a lot of people are not really prepared for that, because it's hard to imagine, like, well, why would that cost me so much? And it's a difficult thing to really wrap your mind around until you start experiencing it. That every single time, even when you, it's not even an outward expression of indulgence. Just to fight with someone in your mind costs you enormous amounts of energy. It's unbelievable, and it happens all the time. You know, it just. You're driving and someone does something rude on the road, or you know, you smile at someone and they give you a weird look back, and you might start to create a story, and you consume vast amounts of energy, diluting your awareness into fighting, having conflict with people, and so when you're accustomed to having all your resources available to you, then diluting it with this story generation, it's very obvious. Okay, that brings me to a major point that I'd like to make, that there's a lot of emphasis in the spiritual communities to just focus on opening the mind and to talk to angels and to connect with God and speak with the land and talk to trees and, you know, all these really awesome, unbelievable, amazing, I cannot possibly imagine that this is actually true, but it is, and you know, your heart just explodes with joy. But there's so much emphasis on that there's much less emphasis on what it takes to sustain these types of perceptions. And so the way I imagine it is, like, I see all these people with a brick in each hand trying to swim. And what I mean by that is there's emotional weight that people carry, and instead of letting go of that weight and just floating to the surface and being able to comfortably and joyfully look around and appreciate the ocean, they're clawing at the surface of the water with these weights in their hands. And that, from my personal experience, that was why I insisted on going through such torturous experiences, forcing my mind to open, was because I didn't realize how critical it was to let go of the weight that was holding me. All you have to do, let it go, and you will float. It's very, very simple. It's very simple. It's so simple that we almost don't want it to be true. And so that's why the emphasis of forcing my head above the water at all costs shifted completely 180 degrees to letting go of everything that's holding me down. And that's why we do breath work. That's the whole purpose of breath work. It's, people have very, very exotic hallucinatory experiences connecting with angels and earth and ancestors and all that, and those experiences are amazing. I don't want to disregard them at all, and not to make anyone feel ashamed or embarrassed in any way. Those are really profound inspirational experiences, but that's not the point. The point is to let go of the accumulated weight in your system so that this stuff that's so inspiring and novel becomes commonplace. That's the real goal. That's what I really love to see for the community, is not that people have to try to have spiritual experiences, but that they're just so light and open and free that the life is experienced as an ongoing spiritual experience. And so that's been a big shift towards really developing people in a way that gets their roots deep in the earth, that they're very strongly grounded and secure. Because I do a lot of gardening, so I like to think of people as trees. If the crown of the tree is overdeveloped and the roots are not, what happens with just a little bit of wind? And this is why people, when they do, let's say, and I'll pick on ayahuasca right now, people do too much ayahuasca and no integration, they lose their minds. And probably a lot of you have seen that, because there's just not enough counterbalancing development. And so my perspective now is not even to grow up as much as down, or down as much as up, but to just grow down. Because when the roots are so strong and firm, holding the ground, there's nothing the tree can do but to open its canopy and to flower and fruit. You cannot stop it when there's so much energy coming up. And that's the way I'm trying to reorient the spiritual and healing community, is to focus on that, really strengthen the roots, and then everything else that you want to happen is just going to happen naturally. And you actually, it would be difficult for you to stop it when there's so much power coming through. In the maturing process of presenting yourself as a healer, that's particularly difficult for me, and I think is prohibitive for a lot of people. My mentor, a lot of you know Nigel Patterson, he was telling me at one point that listening is the hardest thing to do. And I thought, that is so right. I love just to prefer talking and not listening. And that's just so much more enjoyable. And so, really being present with someone and listening to them is the hardest thing to do, because you're just creating that space for them, and that's really important. But I think that there's actually one thing that's harder than that, and what's harder than that is to listen to someone's suffering and to not do anything about it. That, for me, is I'm a natural rescuer, and I love people, and I want to help at any time. And to see someone unconsciously hurt themselves over and over again, and to just know that it's important for them to experience that suffering, it's like we see everyone as the baby chick, and we say, oh, that shell has to be discarded and thrown away so that the chick can survive. What we don't acknowledge is that shell itself, the human shell, it has a consciousness on its own, and the chick is not Michael. The chick is God. Michael is the shell, and so that cracking is a critical step in the birthing of divine consciousness on the planet. So when we say, oh, I need to stop this person's suffering, most of the time we don't say that just because we love somebody else. We say that because it's unbearable to see them hurt. Okay, I'm gonna try to tell a funny story now. Yeah.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. So this is my didgeridoo, and this is not my first one. My first one was much shorter. It was about this tall. And when I was doing, so I lived in Bali for a short period, and I was doing breathwork, individual one-on-one breathwork sessions with people, and I was only supposed to be there for a week, but I said, you know what, I'm so committed to doing breathwork that if anybody wants it, anybody says, I want some of this medicine, if they have money or they don't, I don't care, just come over, let's do this, because that's critically important to me. I want to offer this. So what ended up being, I was supposed to just be there for, I don't know, 7 days, 10 days. I ended up staying for over 3.5 months because not every single day, every few days, people just kept saying, oh, I heard you did a breathwork session with this and the results were amazing, so we want to come in and try it. Okay, fine. So I just kept staying and performing these ceremonies with people. And one of the things that I would do to kind of center myself and focus was to do the breathing with them as I'm moving around them. And I felt like that was important so that I could really get into that shamanic state with the participant. Well, the thing is, we always have people, when they're doing breath work, lay on the ground. And the reason for that is that your legs get wobbly and your orientation can start to slip. So what ended up happening was this woman was lying down, doing breath work, doing great, and I decided after maybe 20 minutes, okay, I need to get into it more. So I blacked out for a second, and I had the didge in my hand, the shorter didge. I blacked out, the didge hit the ground, and my head, bunk, off the didge, and then I fell on the ground. And I don't know how long I was out. And I looked around, and the floor was all tile. And I see blood splatter all over the floor. There's blood splatter on my arm, down the didge. And I'm like, I panic. I had no idea how long I was unconscious. And I look up on this platform, like on this bed thing, and the girl is just doing her breathing. And I was like, oh my God, she's so focused. I'm jealous. And I was like, oh, well, she's still going. I feel okay. I don't know how long I've been out, but seems fine. So. So I go to the bathroom real quick, and I see that there's 2 slices, like above and below my eyebrow. I'm like, that looks pretty bad, but it doesn't hurt, it's probably some shock. And I'm like, okay, we can keep going, because she already paid. And so I go back, and we do a bit of like light touch body work, energy work, and but the blood is still flowing, not gushing. I don't want to exaggerate, but it was trickling, and so I was leaning over her, trying to, with my hand on her heart and like one on her stomach, but I could feel the blood is like trickling down, and I'm like, oh, this would be so terrible if I dripped on her. So as it's trickling, I'm like turning my head so the blood is like dripping across my face instead of on her. And as it comes here, I kind of go back this way, and I'm just like zigzagging this blood on my face, and then eventually I'm like, oh, it's definitely gonna drip now. So I go back to the bathroom and I wash my face real quick, and I'm like, how bad is it? So I kind of pull here, and there's not much tissue here, so I could see the bone underneath it with the two splits. And like, oh, okay, then it was this interesting experience of like, am I being asked how committed to breathwork I am right now? Should I just go to the hospital? Or do I stay here and finish this session? And I'm like, am I being too spiritual? Am I overthinking it? Should I just go to the hospital? It's the reasonable thing? Or is this a test? And I just like, you know what? I feel okay enough. I'm just going to keep going. So we did. An hour expires, and this poor woman, she sits up, she looks at me, she's like, oh my God! Like, what's going on with your face? And I'm like, yeah, I fell, and I hit it. She's like, yeah, I heard you, but you said, keep breathing, don't let the thoughts get in, keep breathing, keep breathing. So she stayed focused, and I'm very proud of her. And then luckily, my friend lived underneath where we were, and she took me to the hospital, and I have only great things to say about hospitals in Bali. I got stitches and shots and care, and it was like $65. It was amazing. Love that.
Almost as good as India. India.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the story. I just the tendency towards intensity and emotional heaviness can be really easy to fall into. There's a certain morbidity, but keeping track of lighter stories, keep the heart light. So anyway, thank you all for listening. I do have the books in the back if you want to check that out. And we will be doing a breath work here at 1:30 if you'd like to participate. Suggested donation is $40. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, question?
Can you just for a minute or so say what the breathing means? What is breathing?
Breathing. That breathing, simple as that, over an extended period of time, by whatever miracle of nature, leads to consistently the unlocking and unbinding of emotional and psychological wounds. I don't know how that works, but it's so consistent, it's reliable, it's safe, it's effective. Compared to every other thing that I've ever done, I go through all of that in the book, breathwork is far superior. And that's why we do it, that's why we share it. I wish I could have a more coherent scientific answer, but even among people like Wim Hof, he gets refuted on various medical suppositions about it, and I actually don't really think that it's important. It's like, is it effective or not? When I drove here, I didn't think to myself, do I understand how the engine works? Do I need to know how the starter is going to trigger the thing and the combustion and all? No, I just push a button and get where I'm going. That's what I care about. I want it to be effective and safe. Yeah.